You might outline your situation.
Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach, and I too would like to welcome Minister Abbott to the Seanad, and I'm very grateful, and indeed the workers in the ESB group of companies will be also pleased, and I'm very glad that the Minister has taken time from his busy schedule to come into the Seanad this evening to personally take this question. I'm sure the Minister is aware of the issues and the concerns involved, and I'm taking the opportunity, I suppose, this evening on the record to seek, I suppose, clarification and reassurance on the issue. I've been contacted, I suppose, on a daily basis now over the last number of weeks, Minister, from ESB workers throughout Laois, Offaly and Kildare and the Midlands. The ESB is a strong and well-respected and valued employer, and indeed generations of families have been employed in the ESB throughout the Midlands over the years. And now the startling, I suppose, news, or the unnerving news, that the ESB pension scheme is in deficit to the tune of apparently between 1.6 and 1.7 billion. And I suppose it's difficult to see how that could occur in such a highly successful and profitable semi-state company, which is an international status and indeed pays handsome and substantial dividends to the state and on behalf of the taxpayer to the government on an annual basis. The other area of concern that is of worry to the workers, and I can understand it, I fell victim to it myself when I was employed in the newspaper industry, where the management have unilaterally changed the status of the pension scheme from a defined benefit scheme to a defined contribution scheme. And that also raises alarm bells for workers who are looking forward to the retirement in the years ahead, and the significant impact that could have on their entitlement. We have seen, unfortunately, due to the financial, I suppose, flux that is in the sector and in the industry over the last number of years, where, for instance, the Waterford Crystal workers were left high and dry. It's not a parallel thing, but nonetheless it does raise the alarm bells. And in other companies in the private sector, we have seen situations where pension schemes are going to the Irish Pension Board seeking a write-down in terms of the exposure and what is due to workers. So I suppose, Minister, I'm hoping that you can bring some clarity and some reassurance to the area this evening, particularly as the ESB fund, the ESB pension scheme, is the largest funded pension scheme in the country, with liabilities in the region of 5 billion. And I suppose it would send a worrying signal to all workers, whether in the private sector, the public sector, or the semi-state sector, that if they could not rely and trust the pension scheme in such, if you like, a gilt-edged company such as the ESB, what hope would other companies have, and what hope would workers at other companies have, as people, do the prudent thing and contribute on a weekly basis towards their pension for retirement? Thank you very much,
Minister. Pat Roberts to respond.
I'm here, last Cathaoirleach, out of respect for the House, and my understanding is I'll be here again with you next week. I understand I'm slotted in.
You're all welcome.
Legislation. I'm grateful for that, sir, but if I could have the temerity to say, as a member of the lower house, that I was advised at some stage today that I ought to be here at 5 to 6, and it's now 8:20. And without intruding into the affairs of a house of which I'm not a member, if it is the wish of the Seanad, as it ought to be, I think, to have ministers to come into the House to deal with issues for which they're responsible, I would respectfully suggest that you ought to be able to organise your business a bit more efficiently than inviting me to be here at 5 to 6. I have changed two commitments that I've had this evening in order to be here, and I am here. But in the lower house, if one is called on a topical question, for example, and it says it's 5:43, then you're there at 5:43, and I make these remarks with due respect.
Minister, to say on behalf of the House, I want to apologise to you because there was a late change in the order of business which resulted in this situation. It's not normally the situation, and I was a minister as well coming into this House, and I came here many times, but in fairness, in this situation there was a change, and we apologise to you and thank you for coming at this stage. It won't happen again.
I'm grateful to you, sir. Thank you. I understand, Cahill, that the issues regarding the ESB pension scheme, which has about 13,700 members, needs to be handled sensitively and carefully. And I'm therefore pleased to come into the House to give you what information I can that has been provided to my department by the ESB. In late 2008, the trustees of the ESB superannuation scheme brought forward the triennial valuation of the scheme by 1 year to assess the financial health of the scheme. The actuarial valuation to 31 December 2008 showed an ongoing valuation deficit of 1.9 billion and a minimum funding standard deficit of 1.8 billion. As required by the scheme rules, ESB and the ESB group of unions formed a working group to assess how best to address the reported deficit and to protect, as far as feasible, the interest of ESB and the current members of the scheme. The ESB reached an agreement with the staff in 2010 to resolve the pension deficit. The agreement closed the scheme to new entrants, it broke the link between salaries and future pension increases, and it introduced a solvency test in relation to future pension increases. The measures adopted under that agreement have, I understand, had a positive effect, resulting in the scheme actuary recently reporting that the scheme is now in balance on an ongoing actuarial basis. Aside from the ongoing actuarial position, the Pensions Board also requires the ESB scheme to assess whether it could meet a certain prescribed standard known as the minimum funding standard. This effectively tests whether the scheme could meet all its current obligations if it were wound up immediately. In other words, if everyone retired from the company next Friday night. Neither the government nor the ESB envisages the winding up of the scheme or everybody retiring next Friday night. But regardless, the scheme is currently still required to meet the requirements of the minimum funding standards. I understand that the scheme actuary reported at the end of 2011 that the ESB scheme, like many others, did not at that time satisfy the minimum funding standard requirements, and I assume that this is the deficit that the Senator is referring to in his question. I understand that the Pensions Board does not require the minimum funding standards deficit to be addressed immediately, but does require that a plan be developed to address it over a reasonable time. I'm informed that the trustees of the scheme, with the agreement of the ESB, submitted a funding plan to the Pensions Board, which was approved in October 2012. I'm also informed that this plan aims to eliminate the deficit by 2018, and this plan remains on track. In common with other companies where Irish government is the principal shareholder, the scheme is governed by legislation and supplementary regulations. I understand that in the event of a deficit arising in the scheme, the regulations require that the relevant parties meet to agree a mechanism to address the deficit. I understand that in August 2013, solicitors, on behalf of a small number of the ESB scheme, served a plenary summons on solicitors for ESB, and therefore this issue is subject to judicial proceedings. Finally, and with regard to the manner in which ESB accounts for the scheme in its financial statements, my department has been assured by the ESB that, having taken expert legal and financial advice, the company is entirely satisfied that the current accounting treatment for the scheme is correct and in accordance with applicable laws and international accounting standards. I trust that this provides some clarity for the Senator.
Thank you, Minister. Senator John, will you wish to supplementary?
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Gerlach, and I will take the opportunity to have a brief supplementary. And I'm grateful to the Minister for the information he's brought to the House. I suppose I'd like to just respond in the matter he raises. It's no part to any of the senators that the schedule was changed at 2:30 today in terms of the order of business to reschedule the business of the House. I too had anticipated the question would be taken at 6 o'clock. But also I think it's important to put on the record that, with no disrespect, that at the Minister's request, this question was tabled last Wednesday and was deferred at the Minister's request to be taken this week at a more suitable time. I suppose, Minister, I'm grateful for your response, but I suppose for the ESB workers, it nonetheless is a worrying change and transformation within how the pension is being handled and dealt with in the company, with the ESB group of unions going to so far as to describe it as a pensions crisis. And I know from speaking to workers directly that it is leading to unease, with some of them talking about industrial action and industrial unrest. And I know that the Minister, no more than anyone else than myself, or indeed the workers, would relish or welcome that kind of outcome, were they not to find full comfort in reassurances from the company, because the last thing we need heading into the winter months is any industrial unrest from a company of such strategic importance to our economic recovery as the ESB. Thank you.
Minister Rich to respond.
I agree with the Senator. I mean, the last thing, obviously, that the country needs, the economy needs, or private domestic consumers need is industrial unrest. I genuinely don't believe that there is any serious cause for industrial unrest. I believe the pension scheme is absolutely sound in the case of the ESB. There is no comparison of any kind to be drawn with Waterford Glass and the tragic circumstances that happened there, or in any other private failed pension scheme. The ESB pension scheme is one of the most robust in the country. It is not the fault of the ESB unions or the ESB management that the pensions board requirement in respect of the application of minimum funding standards has created a situation where a scheme that previously was in sync now has a temporary deficit. But the plan entered into between the trustees and the company and so on will bring that situation back in sync by 2018. I'm aware, of course, that judicial proceedings are pending, and it's not for me to comment on what will happen in the courts. But I honestly believe that the pension scheme is sound. I can understand why it's so important for the workers concerned, but there isn't, in my best judgment, any cause for concern or unease on their part. And I believe, everybody knows that the ESB is not going to close down on Friday evening, nor are all of the employees going to go out on pension at the weekend. So therefore, the concerns will not be realised.
Thank you, Minister.